Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 535, and today is January 29th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a lot of news to get through on today's show. As I mentioned last week, we're doing some bonus shows this week to try to catch up with all the news. So I do have some updates on the war in Gaza today. I also have news on Yemen, but we also have stuff on Ukraine, Haiti, Russia, China, North Korea. So a lot of news to get through on today's show. Please share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. You can share the video version from YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And you can follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. All right, let's get into today's news. All right, first story on today's show. Kenyan court ruling obstructs Biden's plan for UN force in Haiti. So if you're, been listening to this show for over 6 months, you've probably heard about me talk the UN deployment to Haiti that the U.S. is trying to put together. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than the traditional UN deployment. They're not going to operate under the banner of peacekeepers. The U.S. it was trying to take a coalition of police, mainly from Kenya, and then deploy them to Haiti to restore order. So my article for the Institute, the Kenyan High Court has issued a ruling that will prevent President William Ruto from sending over 1,000 police to Haiti. The Biden administration had incentivized Nairobi into agreeing to lead a multinational force into Haiti. The UN peacekeepers have a troubling legacy in Haiti, including causing a cholera outbreak that killed thousands. So in October, the UN Security Council voted for Washington's resolution to deploy multinational police force to Haiti aimed at restoring order in Port-au-Prince. The White House has spent a year searching for a nation to lead the mission before Nairobi agreed. And initially, the U.S. was hoping Canada would do it, and Ottawa just refused. And so eventually they enlisted Kenya. And now this was brought up on Twitter, I think as a joke, but just to say that I think this did have a lot to do with it. I actually listened to the debate at the UN Security Council when they were approving this mission to Haiti. And a lot of the people who are saying that, in the past, the UN peacekeepers haven't done so much good stuff in Haiti, sure, but this time they're going to be African peacekeepers. And, Haiti's legacy is, descendant from, people who are taken from Africa as slaves and then slave uprising. And so, because of their African roots, that somehow this is going to go better with the Kenyan police force. So, that really was a good part of the debate as to why they thought it would work better this time. President Ruto agreed to send more than 1,000 Kenyan troops to Haiti to act as a police force. Washington agreed to fund the mission and signed a new defense cooperation agreement with Kenya. And so that was the incentives for Kenya. The increased security ties with the U.S. was a big one. They even got, I think, Lloyd Austin to go all the way to Kenya to sign the pact with the Kenyan defense minister. So this was not well liked. It's liked by the leadership, Joe Biden in America, Ruto in Kenya, and then the Prime Minister of Haiti, Ariel Henry. However, the support is not widespread among Kenyans and among Haitians. So the Kenyan opposition leader, Ikru Akot, challenged the planned deployment at the country's high court. On Friday, the court ruled in favor of the opposition leader. However, the Kenyan government plans to appeal the ruling. The ruling is a major setback for the Biden administration's plan to send a multinational force into Haiti to restore order. In a statement responding to the Kenyan High Court's decision, the White House said it was committed to deploying a UN force to Port-au-Prince. And then this is from the White House statement. The United States' commitment to the Haitian people remains unwavering. We reaffirm our support of ongoing international efforts to deploy a multinational security mission for Haiti, and we renew our calls for international community to urgently provide support to this mission. So for people, this is something that I've covered on the show since the assassination happened. in July of 2021. But then President of Haiti, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated in his bedroom by well over a dozen armed men who broke into his presidential, or I believe he was actually at his residence. He wasn't at the presidential palace, and ended up killing him, severely injured his wife. She played dead and actually lived. So, very, very brave on her to be able to live through such a traumatic thing. And I think has provided some details about maybe what was going on. Those who assassinated the president were looking for, and I believe got their hands on, a dossier that the president was compiling and was planning to hand over to the United States. That was going to be a report on gang and drug activity in Haiti. And I guess with hopes that the U.S. was going to work with the Haitian government to round up and prosecute some of these people, particularly those who are bringing drugs into the United States. So he was assassinated, and at the time, so I want to say he was president, and then the prime minister of Haiti, who has less power in Haiti, the president has more power, was Claude Joseph. And so I guess, by Haitian rules, that really should have been the man who became leader of the country. However, Washington led an international coalition to pressure Port-au-Prince into agreeing to installing Ariel Henry as prime minister. So Joseph steps down, Henry steps in, and from there, Port-au-Prince really descends into chaos. I mean, not that there wasn't a good amount of gang activity before, in lots of poverty, violence, and things existed in Port-au-Prince before Ariel Henry takes over. Gets a lot worse once he takes over, and then the migration problem starts. And so, 2021, 2022, the U.S. government is, trying to prevent migration without saying that they're preventing migration, because Joe Biden ran on the fact that, Donald Trump was the next Hitler, who in one of his main Hitlerian acts was wanting to prevent migration over the southern border. However, the migration of too many people is actually a problem, and so the Biden administration was trying to stem it, and rather than doing anything, kind of moral, their plan here is that we're going to establish security in Haiti so Haitians stop coming to the United States. Of course, Haitians are against it. There's been widespread protests among Haitians against the potential UN deployment. UN peacekeepers have a dark legacy in Haiti. The last UN mission to the country was plagued with sexual abuse against Haitians. Additionally, the peacekeepers caused a cholera outbreak that killed roughly 10,000 people. So, good reason why the Haitians don't want the peacekeepers back in their country, or really anybody operating under the UN banner. It doesn't necessarily matter if they aren't, officially peacekeepers, or however the U.S. wants to bill it. All right, so next up here is an article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 28th. Ukrainian military officials uncover over 200 million in corruption. So the newly installed Ukrainian defense minister has uncovered over 200 million in corruption during his first 4 months in his post. His predecessor was dismissed over corruption allegations. So earlier this month, the defense minister announced an audit had uncovered 662 million in corruption. For example, a Ukrainian official paid 40 million for 100,000 artillery shells that were never delivered. Reuters reports Ukraine's intelligence security service, the SBU, said on Saturday it had uncovered corruption scheme in the purchase of arms by the country's military, totaling the equivalent of about 40 million. The embezzlement involved the purchase of 100,000 mortar shells for the military, but no arms were ever provided, with some of the funds then moved to other foreign accounts. The Ukrainian military desperately needs artillery shells. Kiev has depleted its stock of 155mm rounds for its American-made howitzers. The shortage of artillery rounds is one of the main challenges facing Ukrainian soldiers attempting to hold off advancing Russian forces. Corruption has long plagued Kiev. In September, former defense minister Reznikov resigned as evidence of his illegal activity surfaced. Last year, Ukrainian President Zelensky dismissed every recruitment official over systematic corruption. However, the White House has attempted to dismiss claims that Kiev is facing a corruption problem. The administration often asserts that allegations that Ukrainian illegal activity is Russian propaganda. However, and American officials have denied that weapons and aid sent to Ukraine are being misused and rebuff efforts to create an oversight for Ukraine aid. And so, this is something that we've talked about a lot on the show, but just again, this little trickle of information about this is the corruption we're starting to learn about. I'm guessing there's a lot more under the surface. A lot of people responded to that article Wine posted on Eds by, posting icebergs. Basically, this is the tip. This is a little bit you can see above the water. It's far worse below. Next up here. Ukraine plans to start corruption on 4 nuclear reactors in 2024. Reuters reports Ukraine is expected to start construction on 4 new nuclear reactor power reactors this summer or autumn. Energy Minister of German Galushko said. And he explained 2 of the units, which include reactors and related equipment, will be based on Russian-made equipment that Ukraine wants to import from Bulgaria, while the other 2 will use Western technology from power equipment maker Westinghouse. All 4 of the reactors will be built at one particular power plant in the west of Ukraine. So, it seems very unlikely to me that Ukraine will be able to accomplish this during wartime. I imagine it's pretty difficult to build a nuclear reactor in Ukraine at any point in time, but to do it while there's a war going on and with all the systematic corruption we're talking about, seems like it's going to make it quite impossible. It'll be interesting to see what the Russian response to this is. It may depend on what kind of nuclear reactors they are, what, they produce, and how quickly that could get you to some kind of weapon. It might play into Russians' decision-making here, but I'm guessing they won't be happy about it. All right, next up here, U.S. sells Greece 40 F-35s and other warplanes. So Bloomberg reports the U.S. plans to sell as many as 40 F-35 jets to Greece and will also gift the country various defense equipment, according to a letter sent by Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the Greek Prime Minister. In addition to the sale of F-35s, the U.S. plans to give Greece 2 C-130H aircraft, 10 engines for P-3 aircraft, and 60 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles for free from its Access Defense articles. And so, one of the really frustrating things about this weapon sale is I think it's, really all a result from Sweden joining NATO. Now, that sounds kind of confusing, but let's explain this. So, the U.S. wants Sweden to join NATO, but to join NATO, all other countries in the alliance have to agree. And Turkey didn't want Sweden to join NATO because of Sweden's support for Kurdish groups, which, I don't want to say that Sweden supports any Kurdish terrorists, and there are a lot of, Kurdish people who are legitimately oppressed by the Turkish government. And so, they resist for that reason. But, I think the Turkish government claims the Swedish government support for the Kurds that live in Turkey and Syria amounts to military support against Turkey. And so they said they're never going to allow Sweden into the alliance for that reason. Well, eventually they relented and agreed to allow Sweden into the alliance, but only if the U.S. would agree to sell Turkey F-16s. Now, this is, of course, Turkey only wants F-16s because under the Trump administration, they bought Russian-made air defense systems, and Donald Trump banned Turkey from buying F-35s. So now they're buying F-16s. Well, Turkey has some regional disputes, right? We think of NATO as Europe, but really, when we're talking about Turkey and their geopolitical interests, is far more around the Eastern Mediterranean. And so they have issues with Greece, and they have issues also with Israel. And so the U.S. approves the F-16 sale to Israel, to Greece. But now, we have this policy where Israel has to have a qualitative military edge over all other countries in its region. And so then we had to sell Israel more warplanes, F-35s, Apache helicopters, F-15s, I believe. And of course, this is all occurring in the middle of Israel committing a genocide. And then on top of that, Greece and Turkey have border disputes. There's a lot of islands, and I think, what is that, the Adriatic Sea that's north of the Mediterranean Sea that splits Greece and Turkey there. All these Greek islands are Turkish islands. There's a lot of dispute over who controls what, and so the U.S. sells Turkey a bunch of warplanes, and now we have to sell Greece a bunch of warplanes and give them a bunch of other, bribes and things like that. So it's all just a very long, stupid problem that only exists because Biden is trying to maintain and expand a world empire. All right, next up here. Lockheed unable to deliver promised number of F-35s in 2024. So, we're agreeing to sell all these countries F-35s, but they don't work that well and we can't produce a whole lot of them. So Defense One reports that Lockheed Martin will deliver just 75 to 100 of the tri-service jets this year, mostly in the second half. CEO James Taslett told investors on an earnings call that's down from 147 to 153 range announced just 3 weeks ago. So it's probably going to be half of what they said 3 weeks ago that they're going to be able to produce, and likely less than 96 or so delivered last year against the same target. And so, it's not even getting better, it's getting worse. The problem with the Technology Rollout -3 software, part of the Block 4 improvements to the planes, sensors, and weapons. Jets equipped with TR, so Technology Rollout -3, were originally to begin arriving in late 2023, a date that slipped last fall to April or June. And so again, we're agreeing to sell all these weapons, but we can't even really produce them very well. All right, some news on China here. Chinese official slams NATO as walking war machine. So this is Senior Colonel Wu Qin, and a spokesperson for China's Ministry of National Defense, and he said on Thursday, as a regional military organization, NATO has launched and fought many wars around the world since its establishment. In recent years, NATO has been inching closer to the Asia Pacific and using the non-existent China threat as an excuse to advance bloc confrontation, which poses a threat to regional security. It's fair to say NATO is a walking war machine. Wherever it goes, there will be instability. So pretty sharp and I think accurate remarks there. And then we also have U.S. warship sails through Taiwan Strait. So the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, the USS John Finn, passed through the Taiwan Strait on Wednesday. This would have been last Wednesday. China views the transits as the U.S. sailing sailing through the Taiwan Strait as highly provocative and a violation of China's sovereignty. The Navy said John Finn's transit through the Taiwan Strait demonstrates the U.S.'s commitment to upholding freedom of navigation for all nations as a principle, which is kind of an interesting thing to say, because to phrase it that way is almost calling Taiwan a nation, which the U.S. doesn't recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. And then this was the statement from the Chinese army. Recently, the U.S. military has frequently carried out provocative acts to maliciously undermine regional peace and stability. All right. This one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, January 25th. U.S. congressional delegation meets with Taiwan's presidential-elect. A U.S. congressional delegation visited Taiwan on Thursday to affirm bipartisan support for the first time since the island held presidential elections earlier this month. So this is Representative Mario Diaz-Balart. He's a Republican from Florida, and Representative Amy Barra. She's a Democrat from California, and they are the co-chairs of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus. And they met with Taiwanese President-elect Lai Ching-te, who is currently serving as the vice president and a member of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. Taiwan's current president, Tsai Ing-wen, oversaw 8 years of significant escalation in tensions with mainland China as her government forged stronger military and diplomatic ties with the U.S. More of the same is expected under Lai, who is to be inaugurated in May, although the opposition party, the Kuomintang, which seeks to ease tensions with Beijing, won the most seats in the legislative yuan. Lai took aim at China's comments comments he made with the meeting during the U.S. representatives. He said Taiwan is situated in the first island chain and stands on the front line of China's authoritarian expansionism. This makes Taiwan a crucial strategic location. Stability across the Taiwan Strait is extremely important to regional and global peace and prosperity. I hope the United States can continue to firmly support Taiwan, deepen bilateral cooperation and relations, and work with other democratic partners to ensure peace and prosperity in the region. So, very, very provocative. Of course, anytime the U.S. sends officials to Taiwan, China views it as very provocative and almost unsurprising. Just a few days after we have China carrying out military drills around Taiwan. So Taiwan reports dozens of Chinese warplanes and warships in ADIZ. The Taiwanese Ministry of National Defense reported on X that 33 Chinese planes approached the territory around Taiwan, with some crossing the median line in the Taiwan Strait and others also entering Taiwan's air defense identification zone. An ADIZ, an air defense identification zone, is a legacy of U.S. imperialism during World War II, and so these are not airspaces. These are far stretching kind of claimed areas where aircraft would just have to notify if they're in the region, but the U.S. often uses it to make it sound like the Chinese planes are flying right off the Taiwanese island. And there were also 6 Chinese ships that were involved in these war games. All right, next up here, North Korea news. And I know it's been a couple days, I guess, since we taught North Korea on the show, but it keeps escalating. So U.S. officials believe DPRK will attack South Korea, but try to avoid full-scale war. U.S. officials now believe that North Korea will conduct a lethal attack against South Korea, according to the New York Times. Washington assesses that Pyongyang will attempt to limit its attack to avoid a full-scale war. North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un could take lethal military action against South Korea in the coming months, American officials told the Times. So this is a quote from the Times article. The officials have assessed that Kim's recent harder line is a part of a pattern of provocations, but his declarations have been more aggressive than previous statements and should be taken seriously. While the officials added that they did not see an imminent risk of a full-scale war on the Korean Peninsula, Kim could carry out strikes in a way that he thinks would avoid rapid escalation. North Korea experts Robert Carlin and Siegfried Hecker recently published an article in 38 North warning of a potential war on the Korean Peninsula. And these are two people that, when they're warning about potential war, it's not the same context, right? It's like if John Bolton and Douglas McGregor were both talking about potential war with Iran. Bolton is talking about from the perspective where he's salivating over it and how we have to have this, where McGregor is issuing an actual warning, and that's what these two authors are doing in 38 North. So a quote from their article: "The literature on surprise attack should make us very wary of the comfortable assumptions that resonate in Washington's echo chamber, but might not have been purchased in Pyongyang. This might seem like madness, but history suggests that those who have convinced themselves that they have no good options left will take the view that even the most dangerous game is worth the candle." And so, just that what the U.S. has done on the Korean Peninsula has put Kim in essentially a similar position maybe that the U.S. put Putin in 2021, where they feel like war is really the only solution at this point to try to not end up with an American-backed regime change in their country, or in Russia's case, Ukrainian NATO membership. So just to provide like a counter perspective here of an expert that I had sped to, said that the Carlin and Hecker warning is something to be taken seriously, but maybe we could tone down the rhetoric a little bit, is John Pfeffer, and he wrote at Responsible Statecraft: "The usual North Korean approach has been to make wild threats to get the attention of an otherwise indifferent U.S. government in order to pave the way for a fresh round of negotiations. Missile launches, nuclear tests, and promises to turn South Korea into a sea of fire have all in the past signaled not an interest in war, perversely, a determination to restart peace talks with newly attentive adversaries. And this is, it sounds crazy to an American, but I think this is actually kind of the only way North Korea can get the American attention enough to have a round of negotiations on terms that are not violations of North Korea's red line. So, North Korea could call Joe Biden tomorrow and say, hey, we're willing to let you install who you want in Pyongyang. I'm going to leave and go check myself into The Hague. Then Biden would say, oh, yeah, we could negotiate with the North Koreans. This is absolutely fantastic. But to say that the North Koreans want to significantly de-escalate the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, to form closer relationship with South Korea, and to not be in a hostile situation with the U.S. while maintaining their nuclear arsenal and, the own Korean government, the North Korean government that exists, is not something that the Biden administration is willing to even begin talks about. And so North Korea carries out a nuclear test or a missile test. That way there is some media attention on them, and then some pressure in the U.S. politically for Biden to deal with the North Koreans. Now, hopefully North Korea doesn't miscalculate, because a lot of times the way Biden deals with things is with bombs, not words. So throughout Joe Biden's term, tensions on the Korean Peninsula have steadily increased since taking office. Biden abandoned the diplomatic path put forward by his predecessor, Donald Trump. Instead, the current administration has conducted several rounds of large-scale live-fire war games on the Korean Peninsula. Washington has deployed more nuclear-capable weapon platforms to the region, threatening Pyongyang. U.S. and South Korean soldiers have conducted war games simulating Kim's assassination. Additionally, Washington has worked to create a trilateral military pact with Tokyo and Seoul. The provocations have drawn a predictable response from Pyongyang. North Korea has conducted a series of missile tests, placed a military satellite into orbit, carried out military drills near the border, and developed North Korea's relationship with Russia. Earlier this week, Pyongyang fired a new cruise missile. North Korean state media attempted to downplay the test as impact on regional tensions. The North Korean state media outlet KCNA reported the test fire had no impact on the security of neighboring countries and has nothing to do with regional situation. The missile administration explained that the test fire is the process of constant updating of the weapon system and a regular obligatory activity of the administration and its affiliated defense science institutes. And so one thing I will say is, maybe, Pfeffer doesn't exactly have it right on what the North Koreans are doing right now. Rather than trying to engage with the U.S. in peace talks, they could see this as an opportunity where Biden's got himself in way more wars than the U.S. military can handle, much less than he could keep track in his own head. And so the North Koreans think, well, this is a time that we could carry out a lot of missile tests. We could put satellites into orbit, because if the U.S. wasn't fighting a war in Ukraine, if the U.S. wasn't fighting a war in the Middle East, if the U.S. wasn't threatening to go to war with China over Taiwan, then the U.S. could respond to this by carrying out an attack in North Korea. But right now, it just doesn't really seem possible given all their other logistical issues. And so Pyongyang is just going to really exploit the next year to carry out as many missile and weapons tests as they can, to gain as much data from that. And then when another U.S. administration takes office, they would try to reset the relationship and move forward. I think that's maybe a possible calculation in Pyongyang as well. All right, so on the North Korean and Russian relationship, Pyongyang said that Russian President Vladimir Putin will soon visit North Korea. On Wednesday, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned that the U.S., Japan, and South Korea are preparing for a war with North Korea. The Times report noted that U.S. officials believe as he has moved closer to Putin, Kim is likely feeling emboldened. Washington has accused Pyongyang of arming Moscow's forces fighting in Ukraine. One official told the Times that North Korea sending weapons to Russia was a sign that Kim was not preparing for a large-scale war. So there was this kind of part of the article where the Times authors and some of the experts were trying to have it both ways, where Kim is preparing for war by aligning himself with Putin, by giving Putin all of his weapons, which how could you be preparing for war if you're giving away your weapons? If you're exporting weapons, that would, especially for a state like North Korea, suggest maybe that they're not looking to get into a real conflict at that time. So that was interesting. I think certainly the way the U.S., particularly under Biden, has tried to exclude Russia, China, Iran, and all these countries from the world economy, that it certainly has given Kim more options as far as who North Korea could form ties with, especially after the Cold War and the lack of all other communist governments to really join up and link up with here. And so this, everything the U.S. is doing has been presented as an opportunity for Kim, and they've, the North Koreans have used some of those opportunities well, I think. All right, next up here, Israeli intel says significant number of weapons used by Hamas on October 7th came from Israel. So this is from a New York Times article, and it was quite shocking. So I'm just going to go through and read, I think probably 7 or 8 paragraphs from this article that I thought were the most important. So the New York Times reports that Israeli military and intelligence officials have concluded that a significant number of weapons used by Hamas in the October 7th attack and in the war in Gaza came from an unlikely source, the Israeli military itself. For years, analysts have pointed to underground smuggling routes to explain how Hamas stayed so heavily armed despite an Israeli military blockade on the Gaza Strip. But recently, intelligence has shown that the extent to which Hamas has been able to build many of its rockets and anti-tank weaponry out of the thousands of munitions, has been able to build many of its rockets and anti-tank weaponry out of the thousands of munitions that have failed to detonate when Israel lobbed them into Gaza, according to weapons experts and Israeli and Western intelligence officials. Hamas is also arming its fighters with weapons stolen from Israeli military bases. Intelligence gathered during the months of fighting revealed that just as the Israeli authorities misjudged Hamas's intentions before October 7th, they also underestimated its ability to attain arms. What is now clear is that the very weapons that Israeli forces have used to enforce the blockade of Gaza over the past 17 years are now being used against them. Israeli and American military explosives have enabled Hamas to shower Israel with rockets and, for the first time, penetrate Israeli towns from Gaza. By either count, years of sporadic bombing and the recent bombardment in Gaza have littered the area with thousands of tons of unexploded ordnance just waiting to be reused. One 750-pound bomb that fails to detonate can become hundreds of missiles or rockets. Israeli officials knew before October 7th attack that Hamas could salvage some Israeli-made weapons, but the scope has startled weapons experts and diplomats alike. Israeli authorities also knew that their armories were vulnerable to theft. A military report from last year noted that thousands of bullets and hundreds of guns and grenades had been stolen from poorly guarded bases. A few miles away, members of an Israeli forensic team collected one of the 5,000 rockets fired by Hamas that day. Examining the rocket, they uncovered that its military-grade explosives had most likely come from an unexploded Israeli missile fired into Gaza during a previous war, according to an Israeli intelligence official. And then I thought this was really interesting too. Yeah, Hamas fired so many missiles and rockets on October 7th that Israel's Iron Dome air defense system could not keep up. Rockets struck towns, cities, and military bases, giving cover to the militants who stormed Israel. And so, the admission that the air defense system was overwhelmed. There's also a very blunt admissions in here that Gaza remained occupied and blockaded by the Israeli military for the past 17 years. There's usually in mainstream media this pretending that after 2007 and disengagement that the Israelis just let the Palestinians in Gaza go. They can't go into Israel, but they're their own people now, which is obviously not the case. They're in an open air prison. And so, a mission that, they're under blockade is, very important. And then where all the weapons come from, especially when we so often hear in the US that this is all about Iran. And really it's just the fact that Israel has bombed Gaza so much that Hamas has been able to salvage their weapons and reuse them against Israel. All right, so next up here, this one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 28th. The Biden administration halts aid to Palestine UN agency as famine takes hold in Gaza. So the State Department announced that the U.S. would suspend aid transfers to the Palestinian UN aid agency after Israel alleged a small number of the organization's staff were involved in the October 7th Hamas attack. The White House elected to cut aid to Gaza as the famine sets in and the healthcare system collapses. So on Friday, the timeline exactly here on when Israel informed the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, which is UNRWA, or the Palestinian UN Aid Agency. I know that name's really confusing. But at some point, Israel informed UNRWA that 12 of its staff members had participated in the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel. UNRWA, the UN agency that facilitates aid transfers into to Palestinians, has roughly 30,000 employees. I think about 12,000 of them are in Israel. And so, they're all over the region because there's, millions of Palestinian refugees in Jordan and Syria and Lebanon. So they operate in those countries as well. But, the majority of it is in Israel trying to get aid to the Palestinians. And so UNRWA Chief Felipe Laranzare confirmed that Israel had informed the agency that some of its staff members took part in the attack on Israel. UNRWA fired 9 of the 12 alleged employees who took part in the attack. UN officials said one of the accused is dead and they are trying to identify the remaining 2. As far as I know, they haven't yet. Now, the allegations of what these different men did is a little obscure to me. I tried to look at it. They apparently found one dead in one of the kibbutzes, the one that died, and then they have evidence that some were at other kibbutzes or in southern Israel on October 7th. Some of that information was reported to have been attained by cell phone location data, and so I got some questions about this. Other parts of the information was reported to have been obtained through interrogations, which means torture. So I think all that information is probably irrelevant and can be disregarded. The head of UNRWA said, to protect the agency's ability to deliver humanitarian assistance, I have taken the decision to immediately terminate the contracts of these staff members and launch an investigation in order to establish the truth without delay. And so basically, even with the thin Israeli intelligence and information on this, the UNRWA instantly says, fine, they're all fired. Still, disregarding the prompt action by UNRWA, the US, Germany, UK, and several other Western countries respond to the Israeli accusation by suspending aid transfers to the agency. The State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller explained, the Department of State has temporarily paused additional funding for UNRWA while we review the allegations and the steps in the United Nations is taking to address them. Now, one huge frustration that seems so obvious and so problematic and so contradictory to me here is just a few days ago, you had State Department spokesperson Patel, who was, and a couple days before that, it was Matthew Miller. But they were, the State Department spokesperson were, they said, we have a video here of a university in Gaza being destroyed by controlled demolition. And another reporter said, we have a video here recorded by UK press that interviewed these 5 Palestinian men who were standing on the street holding a white flag. And then the reporters walked across the street, and as they're still filming those 5 Palestinian men still holding a white flag, the Israelis open fire and kill one of them, right? Clear war crime. And so when it's something like that, the State Department can't even issue a condemnation. They can't even say, if what happened in that video turns out to be true, it's problematic. What they say is, we don't have enough evidence to know for sure what's going on. But when Israel makes any accusation, 40 beheaded babies, mass rape, 1,400 civilians killed, 29/11s, whatever they want to say, the UN is helping Hamas. That's why we've killed so many UN staff members. The US just eats it up right away, believes whatever, and will go as far as cutting aid to Gaza as people are starving to death. I read on the Twitter account for Doctors Without Borders this morning this horrific story of a woman who, I believe she's in Rafah, showed up to the hospital pregnant and in labor. And, the hospital, they didn't reject her because she couldn't pay. They rejected her because the everything is full. They have nowhere to put her. So she gives birth in a public bathroom and her baby dies. That is the situation right now for the people in Gaza. That is the situation where the U.S. looks at this thin evidence provided by Israel and says immediately, we will suspend aid to a UN aid agency. It's really unreal. All right, so UN officials pleads following the aid suspension to return it. While this is from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, while I understand their concerns, I was myself horrified by these accusations. I strongly appeal to the governments that have suspended their contributions to at least guarantee the continuity of the UNRWA operations. Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, noted that the suspension of the aid defies a ruling by the International Court of Justice. Earlier on Friday, the ICJ ruled against Israel in a genocide case brought by South Africa. A portion of the ICJ ruling called for allowing aid to flow into Gaza. The 2.3 million Palestinians who live in the besieged Gaza Strip are suffering from a humanitarian catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of people are in a state of starvation. Additionally, diseases are spreading and rampantly, and Israeli military operations have systematically destroyed Gaza's healthcare center, and the Nasser hospital is under attack probably as we speak here. All right, next up, this article about just how intense the suffering of the Palestinians are. I have this article here from Middle East Eye. Palestinians forced to eat animal feed to survive. Middle East Eye reports, Palestinians in Gaza have been forced to resort to extreme measures amid growing starvation as the result of Israel's relentless bombing and a full-scale siege imposed on Gaza since October. Many families across the besieged enclave has had to mix various ingredients into their flour to make bread using traditional methods due to food scarcity. Families have been forced to use animal fodder and bird feed baked into their bread, sometimes causing medical problems, particularly for young children. And so this is, probably one of the reasons that the young children aren't actually dropping dead of starvation yet. That, when famine sets in, people get very desperate on what they're going to eat. So rotting food, any kind of animal that you could find, farm animals, get butchered and things like that. People go through dumps and will find, little portions of old rotting food. And then, things like this, taking animal feed and mixing it in with, other food to make it stretch a little bit longer. All right, next up here, Israel says significant gaps remain after hostage deal talks. The office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said significant gaps remain following the talks on a potential hostage deal that were attended by officials from the U.S., Israel, Qatar, and Egypt. The statement said There are still significant gaps in which the parties will continue to discuss this week in additional mutual meetings. The talks were held in Paris and attended by CIA Director William Burns, Israeli Mossad Chief David Barnera, the Qatari Prime Minister, and Egypt's intelligence chief. Ahead of the meeting, the New York Times reported that negotiators were moving closer to a deal that would see a 2-month ceasefire in exchange for the release of the remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza. It seems to me that from the reports that I read that the two sides are still pretty far apart, that Israel is not willing to agree to an eventual end to the conflict at this point. All right, next up here, Israeli ministers attend Resettle Gaza conference. So the weekend after the ICJ rules that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, and the Israelis say, oh my God, how anti-Semitic is the UN and the International Court of Justice, thousands of Israelis, including 15 members, which is a pretty good portion of the Knesset. I mean, there's 120 of them, so 15 attendings, over 10% of the Israeli legislature attended this meeting where they are drawing up plans to reestablish Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip, and that means ethnically cleansing the Palestinians that live there. So Dave writes, a conference in Jerusalem on Sunday that called for the reestablishment of Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip was attended by thousands of Israelis, including members of the Knesset and members within the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, leader of the Jewish Power Party, and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, leader of the Religious Zionism Party, both spoke at the conference, which was titled Conference for the Victory of Israel, Settlements Bring Security, Returning to the Gaza Strip and Northern Samaria. We have nations of lions, and many children are returning there and combat fighters. We must make sure they return there as settlers to protect the people of Israel, Smotrich said, according to Haaretz. Ben-Gvir said Israel must find a way to expel Palestinians from Gaza. He said, if we don't want another October 7th, we need to go back home and control Gaza. We need to find a legal way to voluntarily emigrate Palestinians and impose death sentences on terrorists. I turn to you, Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is the time for brave decisions. Israeli Communications Minister, a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, also spoke at the conference, discussing the idea of voluntary immigration. He said, voluntary is at times a state imposed on someone until they give their consent. And so, kind of like all those jabs that everybody didn't want to voluntarily get back in, 2021, that's kind of the way that the Israeli government is talking about handling this. The Israeli Minister of Construction and Housing and the Israeli Tourism Minister also attended the conference. Netanyahu has previously said that he's looking for other countries who are willing to absorb the Palestinians, and Israeli media reports that the idea of ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip has become official government policy. So I think this could be a very real, this isn't just some people getting together and saying some wild stuff. I think this is a real call to violence and about what they want to do. All right, so on Sunday's show, me and Connor were discussing what had happened in Jordan, and it was really breaking news as we were discussing it. And so we've got a little bit more clarity on it now. And of course, now we get the hots coming out in response. So Dave DeCamp writes in antiwar.com, some senators are calling for direct strikes on Iran in response to the killing of 3 American troops in a drone strike in Jordan near the Syrian border. President Biden blamed the attack on Iran-backed militants, referring to the Iraqi Shia militias, but the militants are known to act independently and there's no evidence Iran was involved, but Iran hawks in the Senate are jumping at the opportunity to start a war with Iran. This is Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican from Arkansas. The only answer to these attacks must be the devastating military retaliation against Iran's terrorist forces, both in Iran and across the Middle East. Anything less will confirm Joe Biden as a coward unworthy of being commander-in-chief. Senator Lindsey Graham, in a post on X, called for the Biden administration to strike targets of significance inside Iran. He added, hit Iran now, hit them hard. Senator John Connors, a Republican from Texas, took to as to call for war with Iran. He wrote, "Target Tehran." The New York Times reported last week that President Biden thought it was only a matter of time before an American soldier was killed in the region, and that he might target Iran directly in response. Since mid-October, U.S. forces have come under attack in Iraq and Syria over 150 times. And of course, the U.S. could just tell Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza. That's all they have to do. That is all they have to do to get these attacks on U.S. troops to stop. And now 3 American soldiers are dead. So this is now 5 U.S. troops that Biden has sacrificed for Israel in the past month. And that number is only going to grow. And eventually, this could very well lead us into a war with Iran. All right. Next up here, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. U.S. confirms it's entering talks that could lead to a U.S. withdrawal from Iraq. So Connor talked about this on the show maybe 2 weeks ago, but now we have confirmation from the U.S. on it, which I think is pretty important. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin confirmed on Thursday that the U.S. and Iraq will start talks on the future of the U.S. military presence in Iraq in the coming days, which could result in a withdrawal. I'm fairly skeptical that it's not going to end that way. I think the U.S. still has enough leverage over the Iraqi government that they're not going to allow Baghdad to push them out of Iraq. Now, who knows how things develop over the next couple of months, how many U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria come under fire. I think a big part of the problem is to maintain the occupation of eastern Syria. The U.S. has to stay in Iraq. And so really it's not just a question about if we're leaving Iraq, it's if we're leaving Iraq and Syria, which I don't see happening. So my guess is that these talks kind of go the way that it did after the U.S. assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general in Baghdad, in January of 2020, where the U.S. maybe scales down its forces some, maybe they remove some of their military equipment, maybe they rebrand their military operations in Iraq a little bit, but I think that's going to be it. All right, Yemen, and then I think this is the last few stories I have on the show for today. Houthi Red Sea restrictions boost group's regional popularity. This is from the Financial Times. So FT reports the Houthis have been gaining new fans across the Arab world. Their popularity, which seems to transcend religious divides, has surged since the war between Israel and Hamas erupted in October, and the movement began its brazen military and drone attacks on ships traversing the Red Sea. A poll by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research conducted in late 2023 found that residents of Gaza and the occupied West Bank ranked Yemen's response to the Israel-Hamas war as the most satisfying among regional actors. In Yemen, where many loathe the Houthis, praise for the group is at an all-time high, even among their arch rivals who have called the strikes on shipping targets righteous. And I think this affirms the point that I've been making since the very start of these Houthi operations, which they may have some impact eventually on getting the U.S. and Israel to back off in Gaza. We're not seeing that yet. Maybe it will. What I think the real victory here is for the Houthis in Yemen. And maybe this could even, I know there's a possibility that this could go very wrong and it could really reignite the war in Yemen. It could also make it kind of that the Houthis now win the war in Yemen and at least reaffirm their control on northern Yemen. And so long term, this could be important to gain the Saudi blockade of Yemen lifted and, essentially at least northern Yemen returning to becoming a normal-ish country with the Houthis in charge. So, we'll see how this goes for Yemen in the long run. I'm not so pessimistic that this is a bad move by the Houthis and it's not going to help them retain their power, especially as it doesn't seem to be going particularly well for the US and the UK. This is from The Telegraph. UK warships in the Red Sea unequipped to hit ground targets in Yemen. The Telegraph reports Britain's warships cannot attack Houthi targets on land because they lack the firepower, in a situation described by former defense chiefs as a scandal. None of the Royal Navy's destroyers or frigates had the ability to fire missiles on targets on land, leaving the U.S. to carry out the majority of the strikes on Houthi targets with support from British Air Force planes. that are based 1,500 miles away. A British defense source said the HMS Diamond, a destroyer stationed in the Red Sea, had not joined the retaliatory strikes on Houthi targets because it did not have the capability to fire at land targets. Currently, the only weapons on destroyers that could fire at other ships or land are artillery guns at the front of each vessel, while U.S. destroyers can fire Tomahawk guided missiles at land targets. The UK's only options for such strikes are deploying planes or submarines, 5 of which are reported to be unavailable at one point in the autumn. So it doesn't seem like the UK's Navy is in good shape. U.S. Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro told the UK that they need to increase their Navy spending. He said, I think it's important for the United Kingdom to reassess where they are today, given the threats that exist today. I would argue that given their near-term threats to the UK and the US, then investments in their UK's Navy are significantly important. That would ensure that they have the free flow of trade, which the US economy of the United States, allies, and partners can mutually benefit from. So, I mean, Del Toro is really just calling for the UK to, take on a larger share of the board and kind of subsidize more of what's going on. I'm not quite sure that they're going to do that. I think they'll let the Americans take the lead. All right, next up here, White House gives mixed answers about U.S. troop presence in Yemen. So Ken Klippenstein reports in The Intercept, amid a raft of U.S. strikes targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen, the Pentagon has boots on the ground in a country, a fact that the Defense Department has recently refused to acknowledge. A small number of U.S. military personnel are deployed to Yemen to conduct operations against AQAP and ISIS, the White House told Congress in its most recent War Powers Act report in December. This month, the U.S. began its military campaign against the Houthis for attacking shipping vessels in the Red Sea, a move the Yemeni rebels said was aimed at getting Israel to end its support on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And I'm really disappointed that Ken Klippenstein is calling the Houthis rebels. I mean, come on, man. All right. But anyways, the real important part of his article here is, as the U.S. began attacks, defense officials suddenly became more receding about how American military presence in Yemen. In a press briefing on January 17th, Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder was asked if he could give assurances that the U.S. had no troops on the ground in Yemen. He responded, I'm not aware of any U.S. forces on the ground. So, suddenly when it becomes important whether or not U.S. has forces on the ground in Yemen, they get real quiet and try to obscure the truth. All right, next up here, House lawmakers tell Biden he must seek authorization to bomb Yemen. This from Dave DeCamp, January 28th, antiwar.com. And the last article I have on today's show, Dave writes, nearly 30 bipartisan members of the House have sent a letter to President Biden urging him to get authorization from Congress before launching more strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. The letter, led by Reps. Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California, and Warren Davison, a Republican from Ohio, said President Biden was violating the Constitution by launching a new war against the Houthis. The letter says, we believe the U.S.'s unauthorized strikes in Yemen violate the Constitution and U.S. statute. We ask that your administration outline for us the legal authority used to conduct these strikes, and we urge your administration to seek authorization from Congress before conducting any more unauthorized strikes in Yemen. As representatives of the American people, Congress must engage in robust debate before American servicemen are put in harm's way and before more U.S. taxpayer dollars are spent on yet another war in the Middle East. No president, regardless of your political party, has the constitutional authority to bypass Congress on matters of war. 4 senators sent a letter to President Biden that also questioned his legal authority for the war in Yemen. So I'm not particularly hopeful that Congress is actually going to do something here that reins in President Biden's war powers. But again, what we've seen from the war in Yemen, the 7-year war from 2015 to 2022, that slow growing U.S. pressure in the United States, political pressure on the White House, did rein in the policy some. Limit the support for Saudi Arabia and the UAE some. And so, maybe we could hope to do the same thing in the Middle East here, where maybe we're not ending these wars, but we are making a difference in what the White House is doing. So, I think this pressure is good in that way. I certainly hopeful so, because things look bad. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. I will definitely have a show out on Wednesday. Depending on what happens today, if the U.S. hits Iran with some strikes or there's other major news, it's possible that I could have another bonus show this week. But there will be at least 4 episodes of Conflicts of Interest this week. I'll be back on with Judge Napolitano on Friday. Last week I was on his... no, this week I'm on Thursday. Last week I was on Monday. I was also on with Rachel Blevins at the end of last week. So check out those interviews if you haven't already. And thank you so much for tuning into the show.